Anyone who's done this line of work for any extended period of time knows that we all love video games. You know, a lot of people in the comments like to go, oh, you hate games and you hate gamers. And it's not true. However, the thing I always say to people is working in video games media, and working in video games in general, actually, I believe, is a lot like working in a chocolate factory. And eventually, every now and then, you're going to smell the scent of a chocolate bar and feel sick. So, with that in mind, I finished this game 3 times. It's so very rare a game strikes me and grabs me in that way. My game of the year is Elden Ring. It is, of course, the latest From Software, super hard, Soulsy role-playing game. But obviously the big difference is it's a little bit open world, it's a little bit different. And it's those differences that really, really make it. Like, I was someone who enjoyed Souls, but this just took it to the next level. There's always been, I wrote an article on the website about this. There's always been people who have been Souls game lore goblins, and they, you know, have consumed everything and read every item description and debated it with people online and all that sort of stuff. This is the game that turned me into one of those people. A great deal of what drew me into the world is how it's presented to you and how it unfolds in this open world. The sense of discovery, which wasn't there in previous Souls games. And that plays into the gameplay stuff, but it also plays into how you can piece together this narrative of who is related to who, and who killed who, and who hated who, and who is technically a half-brother of such, and so on and so forth, in this really non-linear fashion. It's a non-linear fashion that lends itself to then going to YouTube and reading about stuff, reading about data miners who puzzled stuff out. But also, it's a good world. I mean, I think the approach they took also with George R.R. Martin was so clever, where we've seen Hollywood writers become involved in games before, and there's all sorts of ones. There's ones where people are credited in a big way because they're famous, which that is the case with Martin, obviously. But you also get cases where James Gunn did Lollipop Chainsaw, right, before he was doing Marvel and DC and stuff, and people always forget that he worked with Suda51 on that crazy game. The thing is, though, it's easy when you get someone in like that to let them take over the game. It would have been easy for From Software to go, right, we need the guy from Game of Thrones to write us a story, and we're going to build our entire game around it. All they did, though, was get him to write this outline. And nobody knows how big that outline is, although I've spoken to some people that have seen it, and the suggestion is, it's big, but it's not like a novel. It might be like 80 pages or something like that, if that. And all they did was get him to write that. But then they said, we are treating this as our rough basis, but we are happy to contradict it, throw pieces out, whatever sort of fits the game is the thing that has to happen. And it has this really curious effect of what George R.R. Martin wrote is almost like the legend, and how much of it is absolute truth and how much of it isn't quite the truth is something the game interfaces with in a really interesting way throughout. But it definitely really drives you through. And I'm sure Sharif touched on this a bit, but it's a world with character. The world itself is a successful character, which is so rarely the case in open world games. And this isn't a perfect open world. There's lots of reused geometry and things like that all the way throughout. But despite that, every area feels sufficiently unique and characterful, and you begin to care about these minor issues and this political infighting between these inbred families of gods. And you can't fault that, really. The music of this game is, I think, phenomenal. And I think the whole ambience of the game, like when you're riding around, the ambient noise of what the lands between sounds like, is really, really excellent. And that comes back to another element where it's something that ties this whole open world together, that stitches it all in a really strong way. And these are the things that make truly great open worlds. These are the things that set your GTAs and your Skyrims aside from your I don't know, your Saints Rose, that is present in Elden Ring, and it's so rarely been present in any Japanese games of any description. In fact, probably the only other one I can think of off the top of my head is Breath of the Wild. I'm so glad that From is dedicated to making full-fat RPGs where you're even picking stats at the start, because a lot of developers don't have the balls to do that now. That is very much an evolution of Souls, but it's in terms of the storytelling and the world building and the sound and all those things that combine together, that's where this game really sets itself apart and really makes the open world work, I think. It's a repeating pattern now, where there's always a game, and it's not from an unestablished series or studio, but it's from like a studio that's had a decent hit, a culty hit, where maybe they've done 5, maybe coming up to 10 million copies if they're lucky. Then they make a game that is almost like the culmination of everything they've done before, and it's earth-shattering. And there seems to be roughly one a generation, excluding Nintendo, because Nintendo marched to the beat of their own drum. So you had Oblivion leading into Skyrim, you had The Witcher 2 leading into The Witcher 3, and I think in exactly the same way, you have Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne, or whichever one you want to count, leading into Elden Ring. And I think to some degree, there will be a reverence of Elden Ring similar to the way people act now about Skyrim and The Witcher 3, which is astonishing. And we'll see if they can repeat it, because they're clearly going to make another one.
Right, well, of course, as it was always going to be, Elden Ring is VG247's game of 2022. And I'm sure most of you would be hard-pressed to think of a more deserving winner, apart from Pentiment, but nobody listens to me. Next year, we're going to kick off with a big rundown of all the games we're looking forward to in 2023. God knows if they'll actually come out, but it's a problem for another day, innit?